why are we looking at this, and what does this have to do with patterns? What it has to do with patterns is that they're not always what they seem to be. They're always not what you're looking at. That's why it's very important that you know what pattern it is and what the pattern repeat is. All right? So that's a job for a salesperson. Because an installer gets out on site, and a lot of these patterns can really throw you off. Do they look all straight to you? Them lines?
Well, they don't look straight,
but they are, correct. So that's what I'm saying. So it's ideal for a salesperson when he's selling that job to mark what the manufacturer says that pattern is. Because if it's a 18 by 18, 24 by 24, a 12 by 12 half drop, that gives the installer, when he gets out on a job, the lighting's not always the greatest. Sometimes it's dingy, and he's sitting there, and he can spend an hour, especially on some of those Berbers that have the swirls and that through it, he can spend an hour looking for a pattern just to be able to run his row and find where the pattern goes. So if it's marked on there, you have a 18 by 18 pattern repeat straight, he knows that if, an installer, I'm going to come out here and, okay, I can see this spot here. I can see it. I don't see where it's at because it's so busy, but this jumped out at me. So then he can mark that spot. And then he can go out 18 inches both ways, and now his eye is being trained on a certain area to find that spot again, instead of trying to sit there and go, where'd it go? So with that information for him, it helps him locate the pattern on the job site. Plus, then when he starts cutting, when he cuts his seam, he knows, okay, I cut it here. It's got to match again 18 inches this way and 18 inches this way. And if it's 17 and a half, he knows he took some rows out that shouldn't be there. Now, he's going to double check the pattern, because it could say it's an 18 by 18, it could be 17 and 3/4. So once you find it, as an installer, identify it. Okay, they tell me it's an 18 by 18. I measured it. I'm on site. I found both spots and measured across, and it's not quite 18 by 18. They're marking it. It's actually this row. It's running 17 and 3/4. Well, then when you make your seam and you run your row like this here, if I measure across here, and I see that this is a 3-inch pattern across, I know when I make this seam that I'm going to go from one of these points here straight across, and it better be 3 inches. Because if it's not 3 inches, it's 2 7/8. I've cut too much carpet out. So what's going to happen is if it's diagonal lines, for one, the seam's most likely going to show because you're off a little bit. The other is, if you have diagonal lines going across, it's going to come up and it's going to make a jot. Because that jot it's going to make, you've taken too many rows out. Also, if you have too many, and it's 3 foot and an eighth, 3 inches and an eighth, now you've left too many rows in. And so it's going to do the same thing. It's going to show a little bit, and it's going to be off on your diagonals. When you get to this type of carpet here, which is your small cut and loop, is very important. Because if you leave that off, it's definitely going to show that line. Plus, when you're matching it, it's not going to interlock back in that. So it's very important that the salespeople understand if they give the information out to the installer, it's going to help them out. Not that the installer can't find it out there. It's just going to make it easier for them. And, making it easier for them is going to usually make the job go better. The other thing, and you can pass this around, this is one from Bo U. It's a little bit older. These are not dustpans. They are a sign that tells you to stop and make for sure about the pattern, the bow, and the everything that does with patterns. You know, it tells you that if you cut it, it's your responsibility. But if you also look at it, it tells you on there, we do not guarantee pattern repeat to match, but a customer expects pattern repeats to match. But as a salesperson, you got to realize that this thing has been stretched, and some of you guys have been through mills, and you've seen how it's made, and you wonder how they get anything straight. But, you know, it's been stretched and everything else and banged and everything, so it's going to make it harder. But even the mill itself says, we don't guarantee us to match. So as salespeople, you really need to educate consumers of what to expect when you're dealing with patterns. It's simple as that. I think most of you have been through this, and just so you get an idea of what we're talking about, when you call the manufacturer, you want to be able to talk their language. You want to be able to tell them what's wrong, because the first thing they're going to ask, first thing I tell you is when you're calling them, ask them what their tolerances is. Don't tell them, and I'm saying this on film, don't tell them what's wrong with it. Ask them, what is your tolerance of bow, if you have a bow, skew, pattern elongation. Let them tell you what it is. And then once they tell you, then tell them what you have. Don't say, well, you know, especially when, and I have a lot of guys, when I talk to them with a small pattern like this, well, it comes on, it goes off, it comes on, and it goes off. And so there's something wrong with this carpet. The manufacturer's going, well, what's wrong with this carpet? Well, no, like I said, it comes on and goes off and comes on and goes off. What you have is pattern elongation. And why it's coming on and off is in 10 feet, most manufacturers is 1%. So that's 1 inch for every 10 feet. So if you got 10 feet, it can run off 1 inch. Well, if you have a pattern like this, that's only a half an inch, you've just now grew 2 patterns. And that's why you get the pattern coming on and off. It's because it actually, what happens is it catches, it grows to where all of a sudden the pattern's coming on again because it came to another pattern that made it come back on. But once you stand back and look, that's when you get the railroad looks of how it's railroaded, because while it's going off and growing, it gets to where it's not lined up and you get that railroad look. Then it comes back on, and it might be on for 2 or 3 feet. And then it's grown enough to where it comes off again, and it grew another 2 more patterns. So on a 20-foot seam, in their tolerance, they have 2 inches, but you've just lost 4 patterns that's sitting in there somewhere on one of the things. You got 4 extra patterns. And where's it going to go? What the customers are going to see? They're going to see the lines diving like this. They're going to see railroad look, and they're not going to be happy. And that's why, you know, we have some of these tools that we're going to be demonstrating later on. And can you do it with your iron that you have, you know, the regular hot iron? Sure you can. What are you going to be doing? You're going to be stay nailing quite often to get it all stay nailed in. And so it's really funny to me, how many times have you guys got done with a seam and it looked like to you everything was going good, and you step back and it's one of the ones with a diagonal pattern and it goes like this, and all of a sudden it makes a jot and then goes like this again? But you're down there making the seam, and when you're down like this on this type of carpet, it's hard to see. And it's hard to see it line up. We're in the real world. You know, it's hard to see. It's not something that's easy for an installer, because he's right down on top of it, and to him, it looks like it lined up pretty good, but it could be off a little bit.